You're listening to the Center for Auto Safety podcast with Executive Director Michael Brooks, Chief Engineer Fred Perkins, and hosted by Anthony Simino. For over 50 years, the Center for Auto Safety has been working to make cars safer. Find out more at autosafety.org.
Yeah, so let's start off this week. Well, we've already, let's talk about I-95, because this was, it's horrific. Part of I-95 collapses in Philly due to a fire, not from an electric vehicle, it seemed like a fuel tank stopped underneath an overpass, and we don't know yet, I don't think, caught on fire, melted the bridge, melted the road.
The latest report I saw says that there was apparently excessive speed. The gasoline tanker left the road, and just the sparks or whatever set it on fire. And unfortunately took down killed the driver, took down the highway itself. My daughter pointed something out, though, which is, putting aside the tragedy of the driver being killed. In a sense, it was fortunate that it was I-95 in Philadelphia, because it's mostly a local highway. All the through traffic is going down the New Jersey Turnpike to get from, New York to the Piggly Wiggly down in Atlanta, where they're going to be processing jacks. What are jacks?
I have no idea.
You mean jacks like you throw a jacks with the ball?
No, I'm trying to think of the pork rinds. Jack's pork rinds. Yeah, they come from New York and head. Anyway, so the interstate traffic is probably okay. This is a big annoyance for the local traffic in Philadelphia, but yeah, it was just a horrible crash.
And there's nothing that can be done. I shouldn't say nothing. What can be done to prevent things like that in the future? Because you're listening to There Oughta Be a Law. There ought to be a law.
Well, Michael's talked about speed limiters. And
yeah, that's one thing. I think there's a lot of things that, the trucking industry fights very hard against putting in their vehicles, and has for many years. I think if you look, if we talk about it today, the ProPublica article that's talking about the kind of the history of heavy truck underride and how the industry has pushed back against the rear guards, which are now required and have continued to save a number of lives, and the side guards, which are not required yet, but probably should be, although the industry continues to raise a lot of roadblocks to getting that done. So it's there's a lot of problems there.
Well, let's talk about the article. Oh, go on, Fred.
I was just going to say the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, IIHS, predicts that effective side guards on those trucks would save of the order of 800 lives per year. Seems like a big number to me. And I don't know. Why are they pushing back so hard, Michael? Is it just reflexive, or do they have a real economic case?
Before we even get into that, let's explain to listeners what are you guys talking about with side guards on trucks and the rear guards on trucks? We have a link to this ProPublica article. There's an image. I think you can get an idea. But what?
Yeah, and I would encourage listeners to take a look at that article online, because it has a lot of striking visuals of crashes, and what the real issue is here is the height of the passenger vehicles versus the height of the tractor trailer. And you'll see images of Insurance Institute vehicles being tested. And, you're basically coming in to the rear of the semi-trailer at head height, or into the side of it at head height. And so we see devastating injuries and deaths from this type of collision. It's been raised for many, many years. I believe this was the cause of death in Jane Mansfield's car crash 60 years ago plus, and it's just never been completely addressed, by either lowering the trailers, which I'm not even sure is possible given those loads, or by putting some type of guard in place. The issue that I think we're facing right now in side guards, NHTSA just did a cost benefit estimate of, what it would cost to put these in per, life saved or injury prevented. And they're tough numbers. Now those are, you're looking at thousands of dollars going into every one of these vehicles that needs to be upgraded or retrofitted. So it's not quite as clear cut a case as, say, automatic emergency braking or something like that, where the calculated benefits that NHTSA has to use just clearly outweigh the negatives caused by crashes, all of the societal negatives. So it's something that, I think we need to figure out, whether we figure out a new way for, maybe the Tesla semi is going to figure this out and lower the vehicle and run it on Hot Wheel tires. I don't know. There's got to be better ways to transport goods that don't put people at risk, basically due to a simple incompatibility in the size and shape of the trailer versus the size and shape of the passenger vehicle.
I think we've already solved that problem. Is everyone needs to buy a giant SUV, so your ride height is higher than the cab on a semi truck. Problem solved.
Well, maybe that's the logic behind these big pickup trucks that we're seeing now.
That and laser beams on the front of your car. So if you're in this accident, automatic laser beam deployment shoots open the tractor trailer. Ideally, it's full of kettle corn, and you get cooked kettle corn too as you drive past.
Plus, if you look at a Cybertruck, it looks like it would just wedge right under the trailer and push it up over you. And it's made out of stainless steel. So maybe that's why people are plunking down $100 for those things, which are 3 years late now.
Well, there's a lovely article in Ars Technica, which you have a link to. Basically, the leaked Tesla report talking about Cybertruck. Leaked Tesla report shows Cybertruck had basic design flaws. No kidding. Okay. I don't know if you people have seen a drawing of the Cybertruck, but it looks like a 4-year-old came up with a design and said, "Look, mommy, aren't you proud?" And mommy would be like, "You're a genius as a 4-year-old, but as a car company, it's just silly." And as a truck, just these weird angles. Like the thing with a truck is you want to make it easy for people to put loads inside the truck bed. This has some weird angles. It's stainless steel, as Michael was pointing out. I don't know. I mean, Fred, how does stainless steel do in crash testing? Like, I mean, we have crumple zones. Like most of our cars, the fronts there's steel structures in there that are designed to give way, but a lot of it's plastic and things like that are designed to crumple and slow down the impact. Stainless.
Right. Well, there's a parameter for steel called ductility, which has. It does not have anything to do with feathered animals. It means that it's the ability of the steel to stretch and bend without breaking. And what you want to have in a crumple zone is ductile steel that will bend and deform to absorb the energy that's involved in the crash. Stainless steel is not particularly ductile, so it means that you have a lot of limitations in how you're going to shape it and form it, and in its response to dissipating energy in a crash. So that's the real problem. The Cybertruck looks as weird as it does because you have a lot of limitations in forming the panels that you simply don't have with the ductile steel that's used for side panels in a car, for example, where you've got a big press that squeezes it into shape. Does that make sense?
Weight issue with stainless steel as well? Is it? It's probably going to be heavier than carbon fiber or some other materials, right?
Well, it's really the same problem because the stainless steel isn't as ductile, so you can't form it as well into very thin shapes, and still have the structural rigidity or still have the structural strength that you need for the panels to resist, normal things, people sitting on the car or what have you, kind of things that can deform the panels.
And so this article has some basically quotes from engineers working on this that say that it's failing basic things around noise and vibration, and other people in the automotive industry comment that this is really surprising because this is problems we've all solved 50 years ago. Why is a new car today running into these problems? So for those of you, put your $100 down.
I don't know. Yeah, well, none of whom are farmers.
None of
which
them listening to this show, unless they hate listening.
The Cybertruck just looks like an angry dishwasher to me. It's odd.
It came out of Minecraft. That's totally what it looks like. It's the Minecraft aesthetic. I mean,
there's a Minecraft aesthetic.
Sure there is. Come on.
That's interesting. I thought Minecraft was the opposite of aesthetic, but that's just me.
Hey, art is something.
I tried to play it once, and it wasn't very much fun the first time. It's kind of like golf. I tried that once, and it didn't work out for me either.
Is the windmill really got in your way?
No, I used to work on windmills, but that's a different story.
Oh my God. All right, so we're jumping around a bit. Let's talk serious, shall we? So Fred just sent this one, I think Fred, you just sent this around this morning about electric vehicles and the electrical grid. And this was fascinating to me. It talks about how the auto industry moving to electric vehicles is not talking to the utility industries that supply this stuff. And I think in my mind, well, what does that matter? The article points out that the fuel industry, the gasoline industry, has a tight-knit relationship with auto manufacturers, which makes sense. Hey, how does your product work? How does your product work? Let's make them work better. This article points out that the electrical grid starting in the mid-90s, they noticed some horrible things happening as soon as everyone's air conditioners kick on. You get something called voltage sag. Fred will correct me if I'm wrong. So power drops. So these air conditioners will say, hey, give me more power. And they all try and do it the same thing at once, and it winds up crashing the grid. And so utility engineers, electrical utility engineers, are worried this is going to happen when everyone plugs in their EVs. What's going to happen? Are these going to say, hey, I'm running low on power, give me more, and crash the grid? And they're having a tough time finding who the engineers are to talk to about this issue. So
it's kind of, it's really a micro versus a macro issue. And it, as always, gets back to physics. So if you have an electric motor and you turn on the electric motor, the first thing it does is it absorbs electric power from the grid and then starts to turn. Every power source voltage drops when you put a load on it. And the immediate load when you start an electric motor is very large because, well, it has to be because it's starting up. There's inertia to overcome. There's conductors and all that. But the other thing that happens in an electric motor is that as it starts to spin, it generates reverse voltage in a sense. It's called reverse EMF because the same thing that causes electricity to be generated when you spin a rotor in electric current is happening as the motor picks up speed. So it, not only does it absorb energy from the grid to start, it starts to generate backwards electrical energy as it starts to spin. So you can see that there's a balance that occurs. And as it reaches full speed, then the amount of power it's absorbing from the grid is balanced by the amount of electric power is sending back to the grid. Does that make sense? There's a kind of a balance there. So there are two consequences of this that are important for this discussion. One is that when they all start at the same time, you have an incredible amount of power that's being absorbed from the grid. Now, the grid is relatively large. Oh, I'm sorry. The second issue is that if you stop the motor suddenly, it injects a lot of electric power back into the grid. You got to dissipate that somehow. It's got to be absorbed by the grid for that same reason. You've got a spinning rotor in a magnetic field. There's just a lot of energy in there. So that's got to go somewhere. So the problem that arises is if the grid is large and the electric motor loads are small, it's really not a problem because the grid can absorb the fluctuations in power that are caused by the electric motor starting and stopping. The problem is when you have a lot of electric motors and they become more or less the same scale as the electric generating system itself, if they all start and stop at the same time, then you can overwhelm the power available in the system and circuit breakers start to pop and things happen. If you're this kind of person that I was as a kid and stick electric wires into electrical outlets to see what's going to happen, you'll see that the circuit breakers do their job and they trip, okay, because you got too much current coming through the wire. It's designed that way to protect idiot kids like me who are sticking wires into the outlets. But the problem is that it's not designed to continually deliver power and also absorb all the energy that's caused by idiots sticking wires into outlets, or alternatively, air conditioners being all turned on at the same time, which is the same physical phenomenon as the idiot kid. So that's what's going on. Now, the question is, well, you could say, well, but that's not a problem because these are all going to be operating intermittently and it's not going to all happen at the same time. So what's the problem? It turns out that there are times when it does all happen for whatever reason at the same time and does in fact overwhelm the system. There's some historical examples of that. The problem that is being articulated here is that if everybody comes home from work at the same time, a la Simpsons, drives their car into the garage, plugs it in, jumps in front of the TV, that's a huge power load coming in that needs to be compensated by the electrical grid and the systems associated with that. If everybody does that at the same time, then you're going to have a situation where you're sucking tremendous amount of power out of the grid all at the same time. It becomes the equivalent to the idiot kids sticking the wires into the outlet. You just have way too much current coming through. The system is designed to interrupt the power if you overload the system because they don't want the utility wires to burst into flames, which only makes sense. So that's the problem that is being anticipated here. And the author was saying, well, we don't know if this is going to happen or not. We don't know what the requirements are. We don't know how long the EVs that are charging are going to have excessive loads coming in, excessive needs for power. And nobody is thinking about that. Nobody is thinking about the electrical requirements that are needed to be implemented by the electric vehicle manufacturers in order to sustain the safety of the electrical grid, make sure that they don't become the equivalent of 10 million idiot kids sticking wires into the outlet. So that's the problem. And there's no solution just yet. People are not talking to each other because who do you call? There's no Ghostbusters in this situation.
And the manufacturers of automobiles don't appear to be incentivized to cooperate with the folks in charge of the grid. They just want to sell cars and leave it up to them to figure it out, right?
That's the job. People talk about silos and tunneling of engineering, but these are all engineering silos that people work in because that's what they get paid to do. They get paid to solve the problem of how to plug in the car and charge the batteries. They don't get paid to solve the problem of how do you preserve the electrical grid against the demand of the electric vehicles.
I imagine, though, that the EV charging companies like the Supercharger Network and EV America, that they'd want to work with the auto companies because the auto company engineers would be like, hey, what's the fastest way I can get charge out of your system? I imagine they'd want to work together on that to say, hey, now we can charge 5% faster if we use EV America or some network like that. And then you're also having the charging networks. They would want to be going back to the grid and being like, hey, how do we pull this kind of stuff without destroying our business? But I'm just being optimistic, aren't I?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I guess we'll see once there's a big major blackout that's proven to be attributable to EVs, right? And what the response is.
To date, it's still a micro versus macro problem. An individual charging station is still a micro problem for any grid. By the way, it's not the grid. There are several grids. Texas stands alone, and West Coast stands alone, and the East Coast is all divided up into lots and lots of grids. So, that's important too. But all of these are macro considerations that need to be addressed and need to be addressed soon if people are going to be putting up the charging stations all over the country, as is motivated by the current legislation.
And so if you're an engineer working on this issue, if you work for an auto company, there's at least a couple of you out there, we know it. Contact your local grid operator and be like, hey, how do we work together better? I don't imagine it's a long, drawn out, year-long conversation. I imagine it's just kind of, hey, I got your contact info, you got mine. we can start talking. Hey, did you donate to the Center for Auto Safety? I did. Oh, I didn't yet. I'm going to do that now. Walk me through it. Oh, you go to autosafety.org and you click on the support us, donate now button. That's so cool. Great. I really like the way your alternating current works. I like the way your alternating current works. This is getting very strange now. So is America ready for EVs? This is an article in the Wall Street Journal, the paper of record. And it's talking about the issues that the current generation, which is really, let's be honest, the first generation of EVs is running into: software glitches, inaccurate range estimates, and things that are scaring people off. With that, I mean, it's what we're just talking about of what kind of charging plug do I use? How do I access a charging network? The big thing I always see with EVs is people who are not using Tesla's network is always complain that their EV charge point or EV Electrify America, the systems are down. And now it looks like GM and Ford have said, hey, we're going to skip what the rest of the world uses for charging plugs. We're going to use what Tesla uses. And it sounds and feels like to me like Apple's proprietary charging thing for your phone versus what the rest of the world uses. I don't know if there's an engineering need for this. If there's some thing from a consumer's point of view, I look at it and go, smaller is better. Wait, what? Yeah, the smaller cable system seems better than the large clunky thing. But I don't know, gentlemen. Is America ready for some EVs?
Well, the one thing in the article that's kind of it's all happening to all of us, whether we have an EV or not, is software problems. That's kind of unconnected to the EV side, although EVs do typically have more electronics and more stuff going on in the brains because they are trying to appeal to a more technically advanced segment of our population in most cases. So the software issue applies to everyone. Some of the other issues involved are specifically EV issues. And one of them that's, we talk about quite a bit is range and range anxiety. And one of the things that we worry about is whether we're going to use advances in battery technology to give people cars that can go 1,000 miles without a charge, or reduce their weight to make outcomes and crashes better for everyone. At this point, I think we're all aware that the charging structure is inadequate. That's something that was provided for in the Infrastructure Act a couple of years ago. They're rapidly expanding America's charging infrastructure. Whether or not that's the best way to go, we've talked about battery swapping and other things. It's really undecided yet. I think this is the way America's going to go is a rapid, large charger network versus battery swapping, which might make more sense from some perspectives. But that's certainly a problem, as they point out. And then, there's always the issue, and particularly, I guess, if you're renting a vehicle on vacation and you're not familiar with your charging stations, and it can be difficult to do. I think that when you're looking at EVs, you really need to plan your trips probably a lot better than you do when you have an ICE vehicle, because you're going to have to know with internal combustion engine, you're going to run across a gas station sooner or later, unless you're in some really far, remote areas of the country where there may be 100 miles or more between a gas station. But that. With the EVs, you really need to make sure that, because the estimates of range can vary, you can't really get in the vehicle and rely on it to go a certain distance with a certain amount of power, because there are variations due to weather and temperatures and things that can affect the range. So there's a lot of planning involved. And so it's a new type of driving for many. And if you're going to invest in EV or drive an EV or use an EV, you're going to have to, there's a little bit of a learning curve around charging and range that everyone should, take the time to understand before putting themselves into a potential bother.
The range estimate also strikes me as a software issue right now. It just, they haven't written algorithms that are smart enough. I mean, our cars do it. Like my ICE vehicle has, hey, this is how many miles you can go. And it's doing an estimate based off of my current speed. If I start going faster, it will drop. Hey, this is how far you can go. If I go slower, it will increase it. They're not huge, wild swings. So I can't imagine that somebody could write a clever little algorithm for an EV being like, hey, it's winter outside, so maybe we'll drop the range estimate here, and it looks like we're at this altitude. They know where you are, so we're going to change this range here versus it being a warm summer day, and it looks like, and I already know your route, because that's the thing is in these EVs, you're essentially telling it where you're going, so it knows your route. It should know the inclination, declination that you're going.
Maybe. I mean, are you telling your EV where you're going? You might be telling an AV where you're going, but an EV is, you can still use Waze and not tell your car a thing.
Well, I mean, but the thing is, like, that's the thing is, like, you're telling your phone, like, hey, how do I get to the nearest Piggly Wiggly? And so your phone, I mean, they should know.
This sounds expensive.
No, it doesn't sound that expensive. No, I mean, they just make better guesses and just, set aside 5% as padding or something. I don't know. Fred, you're an engineer. What do you think?
I think you're talking about a conflict between marketing and engineering.
Yeah, I know.
I think it's difficult for marketing purposes for the companies to be forthright about limitations on the range. You keep reading articles about people who are doing exploratory trips. A couple of years ago was a trip from Washington to New York, if I remember right, or Washington to Boston in the Wall Street Journal. And this was a trip from New York to Montreal.
Right.
Maybe it's the thrill of exploration that people like. Maybe it's the whole idea of casting yourself into the wilderness and hoping for a good outcome. Maybe that's what this is all about. Aspirational ideas of adventure. But from the engineering perspective, if you knew the destination, you understand the weather conditions going back and forth, you understand how nice the roads are and bumps and inclination and declination and all those good things. Yeah, you could do that, I would think, but it can get complicated and it would be inaccurate. And I think from a marketing perspective, you're better off just leaving that out of your console.
Yeah, but for a consumer, I'd want to know, and I imagine you can get it as close as accurate as your fuel estimate range in an ICE vehicle. Maybe not as quite, but because my car doesn't know how much weight I have in it. It's not doing that for its fuel range calculation. It's not tracking my route. It's just saying, hey, this is how fast you're going. We assume this is what we're going to do. And
sure.
A trip, it says range computer said you got 60 miles for the gallon. And I'm like, no, I didn't.
Well, it's also inaccurate.
Yes.
I have a lot of hills where I live, and I notice when I go down the hill, it's always telling me that it's 99.9 miles per gallon. When I'm coming up the hill, it tells me that it's about 10 miles per gallon. So you'd say that on average, I should be getting about 50 miles per gallon, right? 10 on the way up, 100 on the way down. But that's not the way the aggregate works out. So I think there's a lot of built-in inaccuracies, and whether or not that's intentional or just difficult to estimate, I don't know the answer to that. I do know that the range estimates are all wrong, sometimes independent of what the instant mileage estimates are.
I think you just solved the climate problem there. Everyone just go downhill.
Yeah.
Drive downhill will reduce fuel consumption.
Yeah, it would be good.
Yeah. Now for some more nonsense. We talked about this, and I don't think it was Toyota a while back, but the fake shifting sounds in electric vehicles. Was it Toyota the last time? Because this is Toyota. Toyota's engineers are wasting their time on putting in fake shifting sounds and roaring engine sounds into their electric vehicles, and they want to have it give you the feel of driving, which is absurd, but yeah, give you the feel of driving, whatever that means, including, hey, if you shift incorrectly in a car that doesn't have gears and need to be shifted, we can stall you out. Like, they're contemplating and the fact this comes out to a news article, because this is really a 2 a.m. conversation with engineers who are a little punchy and we're like, hey, we'll make the EV stall. Yeah, let's give it a blown head gasket sound. Let's have the radiator overheat. Like it's hilarious at 2 a.m, but for some reason Toyota's PR team has no sense of humor and said, "Hey, we'll tell people." And it's not even their PR team; it was their head of EV engineering who has no sense of humor and was like, "This is what the guys told me. Yeah, we'll make it so we could stall the car." Why? Well,
the market works in funny ways. My understanding and what I've read is that BMW has been doing this for a long time with their EVs because there's a characteristic sound of for a BMW, and they want to preserve that characteristic sound with their electric vehicles, so they pump noise through their radio so that it sounds like it's got pistons and it's doing the BMW thing. So I actually like this idea because it's a good way of discriminating among different classes of vehicles. So you could have, for example, in a small vehicle, you could say that the automatic shifting or the manual shifting is kind of a dog shift maneuver. And then in a bigger car, you could say, well, this is a horse shift maneuver because, my medium-sized EV is actually total horse shift. And then for the really big EVs, like the Hummer is 9,000 pounds, hazard to everybody and destroying bridges, you can say that that's a total Bullshift. And I really like those categories.
I caught on to what you were doing there.
Well, what? What do you mean?
This is just something where it upsets me because these are very smart engineers and they're wasting their time on garbage.
The stalling part of it just can't be put on the market. That's a defect as soon as it is. So and literally I don't know if they wanted to create just the feel of stalling with this system or if they were actually stalling the vehicle to give you the experience. It was a little unclear in the article, but either way, that seems like a problem, right?
It seems ridiculous. I mean, the feel of stalling, what do? They change the climate system to give you flop sweat?
Yeah, I mean, they're doing more than just noise in the Toyota. They're doing an actual feel. And that raises an issue for me. I mean, if you're receiving feedback from the vehicle that's false,
right?
Does that, that's obviously going to change your calculations for how you continue operating the vehicle, what manner, whether you're hitting the accelerator and what you're doing is going to be impacted by the information you're receiving about the vehicle state. So I think there's, the potential here if they're not careful in how they implement this to give drivers, false information about the way their vehicle's operating. And that could be unsafe.
I had a Volkswagen once, 1960 Volkswagen Bug that did not have a fuel gauge in it. And the way those operated was they had a little reserve tank. And so you would drive down the road as happily as can be until all of a sudden the engine stalled. Then you had to lunge under the dashboard and manually turn a valve to open up the reserve tank and then restart the engine using the inertia of the car to continue your trip. And then you needed to get to a gas station. I really like this idea for EVs, that they would just, spontaneously stop running and you'd have to lunge under the dashboard and flip a switch to, recreate that feel of the 1960s love bug. I would love that. That would be a really fun thing.
That and the crank for the Ford Model T, that's the one I really want.
That'd be a great way to get started. Put a little electric generator on there. It'd be like those old time movies of people blowing up the railroad tracks, where they had to crank up the mechanism and then plunge the plunger down and then the rails would explode. I really like that idea, Michael. That's a good suggestion.
For those of you just tuning in, you are listening to the Center for Auto Safety podcast, their auto data law, with a plethora of bad auto safety ideas. Continuing with Toyota, Toyota's been getting beat up because they're like, we're not doing electric vehicles. This is a bad idea. And they're not really saying what they're doing. The rest of the industry and the rest of the world saying, tough, we are doing it. So Toyota's recently clarified their electric vehicle offerings. They currently have one car on the road, ugly, not very Toyota-like at all, and apparently not very good. which is surprising because Toyota is kind of known for making cars that will last a really long time and are practical and good. So Toyota comes out and says, hey, this is what we're going. We're going to have solid state batteries by 2028, which is a pretty aggressive move because as far as I can tell, these solid state batteries have yet to leave a lab.
Well, maybe they're just getting into this whole line of, if I'm going to make EVs, I just have to bullshit consumers to get sales.
Toyota is not Elon Musk. Come on. That's why I'm saying it's, they're not one of the BS companies. Okay. They generally not say anything crazy.
You own a Toyota, Anthony. Let's be honest here. You need to disclose your affiliation to the listeners.
Yes, I paid them money for a little car that I hope will last forever because I never afford another.
Well, I bought a Toyota minivan once. Remember those old minivans?
Sure.
And it had a built-in air conditioner or a six-pack of soda.
A window unit you'd put.
And it also had inadequate brakes. So after driving that van for a couple of years, I really believe that Toyota does in fact have a sense of humor.
Well, so they say they're coming out with solid state batteries, but they're going to start with the iron phosphor batteries. What are our thoughts on this?
My thought was that there was a mention of a battery that will get you to 932 miles. So we're almost already crossing the 1,000-mile barrier with some of this nonsense. The solid state batteries, if they can get them into vehicles by 2028, I would be very impressed, because while there seem to be a lot of research and just a lot of press around solid state batteries, I haven't seen any evidence that someone's going to be getting them into cars in the next 2 or 3 years. And 5 years is not a long time away for the manufacturers. They're already designing vehicles that are going to come out in 2028. So we'll watch that as a developing story. Solid state batteries are great. They weigh less and they don't catch on fire, apparently. So that's something we really want to come and soon.
But are they the Blu-ray of batteries? Or, hey, it sounds great. No one ever bought it. You guys both have Blu-ray players, didn't you?
I just got rid of mine not too long ago, as a matter of fact. Yeah. So I do know about that. I think that the battery technology is advancing very rapidly. It's advancing in the right direction. It'll have a lot of impact on a lot of things that need to store energy. So I actually applaud this initiative by Toyota, whether or not it's just throwing smoke into the eyes of all the people who are thinking of electric vehicles right now and saying, well, in the future, everything will be better, so you should hold on for a few years. I don't have the answer to that. I'd be surprised if there's not some of that involved in this marketing initiative, but ultimately, they're headed in the right direction. They will be safer. They will be lighter. Hopefully, they'll be able to deliver on that schedule. So keep our fingers crossed.
And hopefully they talk to engineers at your local utility grid so we can all work together nicely. Continuing his criminal enterprise, Kyle from Cruise. Can I call it a criminal enterprise? I am. I did.
No.
You go. Well, I can't. Well,
No. I thought you were going to be talking about me again, but it's nice to have the focus shifted. Thank you.
Look, clearly the listeners understand everything comes out of my mouth is parody and protected under the law. So, Kyle, Cruise, their car's still in San Francisco, still on the street, still without anybody behind the wheels. And now they're blocking the road and preventing the police from getting to shootings. Boy, you gotta love this company and their technology. Of course, Cruise comes out and says, none of this happened. This isn't true. And the internet responds with, here's video footage of it. And the police department responded very calmly and said, we're investigating this.
It doesn't even matter if this one incident is true or not. I mean, we've seen dozens of other incidents, and I'm sure the folks in San Francisco can name way more than we can, where these vehicles have interfered with their daily patterns, their commute, caused congestion, prevented emergency vehicles from getting where they're going, threatened to run over fire hoses, not responded to officers, hit buses, trolleys, the list goes on. And I think that a lot of those incidents could be completely avoided if you put a safety driver in the vehicles. And, we keep seeing the circumstance. I think it happened, on Good Morning America or one of the national news shows when they were looking at it, when they were riding in a cruise vehicle, it stopped and they had to call an engineer who takes, up to half an hour to come out and rectify the situation, move the vehicle so that traffic behind it can move again. That just sounds stupid to me. Get a safety driver in these cars. California, I believe, is going to be requiring them in the heavy trucks and the semis that are going to be deployed. And San Francisco's experience is just ignoring the fact that having a safety driver in these vehicles to take over when there's a critical safety incident where a human needs to respond. Taking that out of the question, just the congestion and the giant pain in the ass that these cars are causing on the streets could be alleviated with a safety driver. So why don't they just put a safety driver in the vehicles? I think it's going back to, kind of, they want to show their shareholders and their investors that these cars can drive without a person in them. And that's the only reason. I can't think of another reason. Certainly from a liability perspective, you probably want a safety driver in the car. That they really want to show these vehicles transporting passengers without a driver in the car. So at this point, it might be a battle getting, requiring a safety driver in California. You're taking on, Waymo and
which is Google.
Which is Google and companies that have a lot of political sway in that state. And so it's we may not get a safety driver back in these cars. And I think that's going to be a huge loss going forward. And I think it's something that the DOT and NHTSA really need to take a look at and establish federal standards to make sure that there's safety drivers. I don't think we can rely on states doing the right thing when they're surrounded by lobbyists from the industry all the time lying to them.
Well, as we've spoken about numerous times, NHTSA has a lot of issues it's got to deal with. So we talked about it last week briefly, the NHTSA Office of Inspector General report and how they're doing really badly at rulemaking, at enforcing things, of coming up with things. And so, how do you pronounce the name? Rodella resigned last week from NHTSA to go work for, wait for it, Zoox, the silliest looking car that is definitely not crash worthy at all. So
yeah, Zoox that's an interesting situation for a lot of reasons. I don't know that that's why Mr. Rodella left NHTSA. It was very, maybe the timing was just coincidental. Who knows? But he was overseeing enforcement at that agency, and which includes compliance enforcement. And Zoox is under active investigation for certifying their vehicles, certifying that they comply with federal motor vehicle safety standards, when there's some pretty serious questions about that. And I'm just wondering, what happens there? Do you recuse yourself from those issues while you're at the agency? Do you recuse yourself from them when you move to Zoox? Or, is this just the typical NHTSA revolving door scenario? Obviously this isn't the first person that's moved to or from NHTSA from industry. And Mr. Rodella himself, I believe, moved over from TRW, which is an equipment manufacturer, airbags, I believe, and other things, to NHTSA, and is now moving to Zoox. So, it happens a lot. We think there probably, not even probably, there should be rules around, the type of work people can do when they're moving to the government or from the government, so that there aren't, clear conflicts of interest that take place that put the public at risk. In this situation, it kind of smells. Zoox appears to be, buying up a couple of influential NHTSA people here and there. And, maybe they're serious about trying to keep this vehicle that's not quite certified on the road. We're not sure yet, but that's something we're certainly interested in looking into as that investigation develops. But the other thing here that, from our perspective, NHTSA's Office of Defects Investigation has turned into a black hole in the past 8-9 years or so. And I don't know if you can put it at one person's feet. If Rodella was involved in that, I'm sure there's some involvement there, but there's also some bad Supreme Court cases that came down on confidentiality and some other factors at play. But NHTSA's the Office of Inspector General report really honed in on that problem, and it's something that's plagued NHTSA's defect investigations for years now. 10 years ago, we weren't happy with what NHTSA was doing 10 years ago, but what NHTSA was doing in this space 10 years ago was far better than what they're doing now. They're not getting documents into their investigation docket for many, many months, and in some cases, many, many years after they've been submitted by manufacturers. And it really gives the public, it gives the Center for Auto Safety and other safety groups far less information to work with when we're looking into these safety issues, because NHTSA is basically a black hole. I mean, and we see it with the Tesla investigations that have been going on forever and don't seem to be getting anywhere. The autopilot full self-driving are still out there actively killing emergency responders and motorcyclists and others and injuring many more. And we don't see any movement from NHTSA. And we have no way of really tracking what the hell they're doing, because they're not posting documents or updates to the investigation in a manner that allows us to keep up with what's going on. So I'm hoping that situation is rectified, maybe by following the numerous recommendations that the Inspector General put out. They also put out a number of recommendations on the timetables we're seeing in safety investigations. They're taking way, way, way too long. And, when an investigation into a recall takes 8 years instead of 2, and you reach the same conclusion, then you've got a 6-year gap there where people are still exposed to the risk. And we'd love to see the timetables shortened immensely on the NHTSA investigations. And we think that the best way to do that is to give NHTSA a lot more money so that they can compete and hire good vehicle engineers, software engineers, a lot of different staffers that they've never had in that building before. From a perspective, 20 years ago, it was a lot of mechanical engineers and software was a new thing. Now it's everywhere, and they need that expertise, and they need a lot more money to compete in that market.
Isn't part of the problem that the government separated in some sense, the investigation from the regulation? They've got the National Transportation Safety Board, which provides a lot of detailed recommendations for improving safety on the roads. These are routinely ignored by the folks at NHTSA. What's the cause of that? Does NHTSA have a dual role in both promoting and regulating motor vehicles?
They shouldn't, but it's certainly I would say an accusation that's been leveled at them before, being too cozy with manufacturers, and there was some of that actually in the Inspector General report, where NHTSA staff were literally saying, we really need to work hard to improve our relationships and continue our relationships with manufacturers. Now, that might sound a little weird, but the manufacturers have the knowledge advantage over all of us who look at the auto industry. They know what's in all their confidential documents, in their tests, and and NHTSA has to have a relationship with them. A good example is, I'm not sure how good of a relationship you can have with Tesla at this point, but Tesla has a lot of software in its vehicles that NHTSA can't just take a Tesla and reverse engineer it and figure it out. They have to get Tesla's, technical input in order to figure out what these defects are, what's going on in the car, why is this happening. They can't just do that on their own. And so cooperation with manufacturers is and always will be, I think, really important and a big part of NHTSA's job. But I think that sometimes when you see, the revolving door that we have here, and you see the chummy relationship sometimes it's built between certain.
Oh, he froze just at that point. He was so animated. His hands.
And he was getting right to the climax too.
Sometimes
Michael,
when I'm having to think really hard, my hands move.
I love it, but the problem is you were just you were doing this Marceau impression of being frozen over Zoom.
That was my internet connection there. So, in a nutshell, that's a do better on transparency and finish your investigations quicker.
Yeah, there you go, NHTSA. And look at that. You heard Michael say you should have more money in your budget. Look at that.
Yeah, that's a must. Yeah, that means request more money when it comes time.
And I found a way to get you more money. Congestion pricing. Are we ready for the Tao of Fred?
Let's go.
Okay. This week it's going to be congestion price. Oh my God. This week it's going to be congestion pricing, which I love because it's first going to happen in New York City, where I live. And my favorite part of this is the people of New Jersey hate it. Take it away, Fred.
You've now entered the Tao of Fred.
Well, congestion pricing is something people have talked about for a long time, and it's actually being implemented in a beautiful city called Copenhagen with very beneficial results. The heart of this is that people talk about freedom, and yet every time they talk about freedom in relation to cars, they are saying, well, I want to be free to enclose myself in a metal box that's very large, very expensive, hard to move around a city, and then I have to find a place to park for it, and so I'm going to circle the block 4 times. That's a strange kind of freedom. And congestion pricing is really all about providing people with alternatives to move within a city without crippling the transportation system. The approach that has been talked about in New York so far, and you're an expert, Anthony, correct me if I'm wrong,
Yes.
is kind of to use a bludgeon to say, well, everybody who's downtown between 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock is going to have to pay extra. And don't worry, we'll read your license plate and send you the bill, and everything will be fine. And people don't kind of like that because that's a big brother approach. Copenhagen took a very different approach, which is to first get buy-in from people on the parameters that would be allowed to be considered within their congestion pricing approach. And they've come up with a wonderful matrix that talks about not only the costs of the transportation as it exists today, but also the benefits that could be accrued to people if they look at certain alternatives, like using a lot of bicycles rather than using a lot of cars. Bicycles are a lot smaller and cheaper, and by the way, if you're able to use them, you'll probably end up being healthier. I see the same thing in Japan when I was over there. A lot of bicycles. People use the bicycles to interact with the public transportation system. Huge parking lots with, just thousands of bicycles in them. Okay, so what do you do when it rains? Well, in Japan, they put on waterproof gear and they put an umbrella up over their head. They ride down the street with that. It's a little different. And how do they accomplish that in Japan? Well, they use bigger sidewalks, and people share the sidewalks with pedestrians and the bicycles. It works. They move, many more people through the cities using far fewer, I should say, vehicles than is in any American city. The problem that arises is not that people don't like it, because they do like it. The problem that arises isn't that they can't do it, because they can do it. The problem is we have invested so heavily in a very heavily subsidized surface transportation system based on the automobile that we would now have to take a look at it and look at some alternatives to that. Look at, maybe we don't need all these parking spaces. Maybe we could take away these parking spaces and use bicycles. You've first got to get people to agree to use the bicycles, and you've got to, look at the angry people who are going to say, I need a parking space, damn it. So, you've got to provide the alternatives for people to move around, because they still want to do that, while at the same time moving people away from the current transportation system to a different mode. That's going to require investment. We've talked about that before. There's no free lunch here. But if you value the real estate in a city properly, and you don't say it's got to be committed to vehicles, and you say, well, each square foot in downtown New York City is worth X. What is the best way for the public to get value out of that very valuable real estate? Is it to use it for a car where you're going to get, $1.50 every 30 minutes to park the car? Or are you going to use it to move 100 people through that same space in the same time using some other kind of transportation system like bicycles or buses or what have you? I think these are
this parking space in New York that only costs $1.50 for every half hour. Because
I haven't been there in a while. That's what is the going rate now? I know Washington's up around.
I think a parking garage would charge you like $10 minimum.
Yeah.
To and say hi. You don't even park there. You just drive past it. Like, give us $10.
So I undervalued the real estate there, but still the point remains that there are alternative uses for that real estate besides the commitment and the subsidy for conventional vehicles. Also, the whole idea of trailer trucks being bumper to bumper along the streets in the city and in the garment district or what have you, loading or unloading. There's got to be a better way of doing that. There's got to, and there are better ways of doing that, but they require the investment in the system. We have long in this country tried to externalize the cost of public assets to the private sector by saying, well, we'll build a highway, but it's up to you guys to build the trucks and trains and cars and vehicles that are going to be using those highways. So that public investment is a significant subsidy for all of these surface vehicles that are congesting the streets. If the investment were deployed in a different way to get the goods and people in and out of the city without having to use the vehicles, ultimately you would end up with a cleaner, quieter, more livable city. But it's going to be a battle getting there because, we heavily committed in the last century to this whole automobile orientation. And we're still headed down that road with the EVs and the AVs, all trying to put technological band-aids on a system that was inherently poorly designed.
I think New York is a great test case for this because so I was joking about the commuters from New Jersey being upset about this, but if you live in New Jersey and you commute into New York for work, first of all, what century is it? Everybody's working from home. But secondly, there is amazing mass transit options. It's, there's bus systems, there's a subway system, there's ferries, there is everything to get you in and out of Manhattan. No problem. It's much easier. You don't have to go looking for, parking, and it's cheaper. So I think this is a good case of cutting down on an unnecessary convenience. Oh my God, did I just become a little fascistic there? That's very anti-American of me, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, why do you hate freedom, Anthony? I mean, come on. Let's be fair about this.
It's just freedom of New Jerseyans. Yeah, there's no need for you. If you live in Hoboken, get on the train, okay? If you live anywhere where you have to commute into New York City and you're not carrying 18,000 pounds of concrete, get on the subway.
Or plumbing supplies, or, there are
there's definitely commercial uses where it's absolutely necessary. Like my UPS driver, I don't live in the part of Manhattan where they put congestion pricing in, but where I live, people crossing the George Washington Bridge, it's a common thing. People get out at that subway stop and they meet somebody there who's driving across and be like, hey, can I get a ride with you? And so they all do that because heading into New Jersey, free. Heading out of New Jersey, you got to pay like $15 on the bridge. And so people regularly stand outside the bridge and be like, hey, get in my car. I'll drive you across and we'll split the fare.
Wow.
Which makes sense because there's no subway across up here.
Well, there are other things to think about too, which is that if you have the congestion pricing, or you have a lot of disincentives for people to drive into the city, people are going to fill up the vehicles a lot more. Even this extends to commercial traffic. I think if you were to look at all of the tractor trailers coming into New York City, you'd find a lot of them are only partially full. They're, if you had incentives to fill them up all the way, they would probably do that, right? Just as you're talking about with the cars, people filling up the cars to get across the bridge and splitting the fee. So I think, from my perspective, it's all good because I don't have to drive to New York City every day.
Either do I. I just wake up from here.
It would be interesting to see some of this happen in smaller cities as well. I've seen no evidence at all of smaller cities or medium-sized cities looking at congestion pricing or even trying to redesign their cities for use of alternative transportation systems. The nearest small city to me is got bike lanes on some of the roads, but then they just end, and people, you've got to have a system that lets people get from A to B, not from A to A prime.
Fred lives in a Shel Silverstein poem.
So anyway, those are my thoughts on congestion pricing. Copenhagen's a beautiful city. I encourage anybody who can to go there and see how it can really work. If people are dedicated to the idea that you are not a slave to the automobile, and that the way that you live and your access to beauty and peace and happiness is important to the city planners.
Fred pushing Copenhagen. Next, he's going to push free healthcare and free education. I don't know why he hates America. Let's go into Recall Roundup.
Strap in. Time for the Recall Roundup.
This week, we've got a couple of them. Jeep coil springs. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Let's see. Potentially 331,000 plus vehicles. This is for the 2022 to 2023 Jeep Grand Cherokee, which I love the fact that body style SUV. The rear coil spring may not be correctly installed, allowing the coil spring to come out of position. Is this going to hurt me or others, or just make my car look bouncy?
It is probably going to do all three if the worst case scenario happens, right?
Oh.
So the coil spring looks like a big cartoon spring that you'd see. So I think that there was a warning in this one because there's a potential for these springs to become disengaged from the vehicle and basically fly off and hit bystanders or pedestrians who are around when it happens. And it appears to happen at somewhat random times. So beyond that, it's an important part of your vehicle suspension, and you're definitely going to have some handling issues when this occurs. So there was about 330,000 Jeeps, Jeep Grand Cherokees. So that's one to look out for if you do own one of those vehicles. And it looks like they opened an investigation into a 2023 vehicle in March and have wrapped it up with a recall in a couple of months. So that's a good job by Jeep, as opposed to what we usually do here, which is bang them over the head with the bad jobs they do.
Or the spring. Mercedes, 8,281 Mercedes-Benz EQS 450. Oh, the 450, please. That's for the poor. This is a hybrid electric car. Let's see. Due to a deviation in the development process, that's never a good start for a software problem. Due to a deviation in the development process, the electric drivetrain software may improperly respond in the event of a detected fault at a specific plug connector within the electric drive. What? Get it?
Analog versus digital. So we've talked about validation of software, and validation of software always assumes that the analog parts of it are working properly. This is not that case, though. This is a case where an analog input, which is the connector, isn't properly considered by the software itself. So they would have to have injected a fault into the system that says, well, I've lost this connection and the signal is going through this connection, in order to do the validation of their software and the response. This is the kind of thing that only comes up with experience and with some time of hardware in the loop and testing that really replicates real world conditions. So it's a very difficult kind of thing to detect in advance, and good for them for identifying this and working on the fix.
And
how many vehicles? Sorry?
You were really excited. Analog versus digital. Analog versus digital. How many vehicles? It was
8,200.
8,281. The 2022-23 Mercedes-Benz EQS 450, colored blue. Now, it doesn't matter your paint color. Get this fixed. Have some engineer with a pocket protector, dweeb glasses, just plug in the connector, and that solves it. Now, am I anti-Geek-ite? Last one. Ford, I think we did touch on this one briefly last week, but this is an update. This is for over 125,000 2020 to 2023 Ford Escapes, Ford Mavericks, and 2021 to 23 Lincoln Corsair vehicles. This is effective vehicles that have 2.5 liter hybrid electric or plug-in electric vehicles. And basically, what are they saying here? The Ford advises customers to safely park and shut off the engine as quickly as possible if they hear unexpected engine noises, lose power, or see or smell smoke. This is just another cartoon recall. Like, does the car also go, Aruga?
This is actually, I wanted to point this one out because it's kind of a new warning from NHTSA. We see a lot of park outside and occasionally do not drive warnings from NHTSA, but this is one I wish they'd had a few years back when we were looking. Well, the problem's still ongoing, but when we were looking into the Hyundai Kia fires, because this is exactly the type of scenario that we were seeing there. Their vehicles were catching fire while they were driving. In many cases, they didn't even know and were alerted by other drivers to the fact their car is on fire. But it was a similar situation where you need to pull over quick, and particularly if you have, occupants in the vehicle, everybody's got to be able to get out of the car in time, because once, in this case, I believe there's fuel vapor involved. That's a pretty quick fire, and that creates a need to egress from the vehicle as fast as you can.
Do we know what the cause of this is?
Oh, I think there was an engine failure, and there's the possibility that when the engine fails, it's going to release either oil or fuel vapor into areas of the engine or under the hood where there are ignition sources, so causing a fire.
Okay, well, that's one vote for removing everything from underneath the hood. If it's not there, it can't catch on fire.
Make it a front.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why they need such big hoods on these cars or these pickup trucks. I don't know. There's got to be a reason for that.
Yeah. Well, these are the kind of, the Ford Maverick is like their smaller truck. The Ford Escape is like their mini SUV, right? And I have no idea what a Lincoln Corsair is, but if it's a Lincoln,
I think these are probably all the Mercury Ford. Well, it's not even a Mercury. The Maverick. I don't know what a Maverick is. I guess that's I
think it's a small truck, or it's I'd
replace the Ranger, kind of the Ranger size truck. I don't know. Maybe. That's what it looks like.
If you have these vehicles, get it fixed. Get it fixed. The fix is what? Free. Why? Because it's a recall. Who recalled it? The government. Boo, the government. How dare they make me get things that are dangerous fixed for free? I know.
Well, they won't make you, unfortunately.
Right. But you should, because it's free. And you're like, shaking your fist at the government. But hey, look at this. You get something for free. It's not free. It's wasting my afternoon where I could be sitting around drinking beer and staring at my feet. I don't know if people do that.
Well, it also may save your life.
In Germany, they take your license plates away if you don't get a recall. Just keep that in mind, folks.
Wait, in Germany, they take your license plates away if you don't get a recall?
Yes.
Oh.
You have to get your recalls performed, or they send someone to your house and bye-bye your ability to drive. So.
Oh, I love it. I love it. One vote.
Can you imagine putting that system into play in America? The guys who repo cars, you see people shooting at people in driveways all the time these days, right? Just for nothing. And can you imagine someone from the recall police force coming to take your tags off your vehicle?
Oh.
We would probably have more people dying from that practice than we would in the vehicles. Who knows?
Well, hey.
I would like to solicit our readers' help. We've tried to coin two phrases here in this episode. One is Anthony's phrase, anti-geek-ite, which I think has a lot of legs on it. The other was my phrase, total bullshift.
Yeah.
So, if readers could just send a note and let us know which of those you prefer or your own suggestion of a coinable phrase. Be glad to hear from you.
Hey, I think you just saved me a lot of brain power because that's going to be the name of this episode. Total Bullshift or Anti-Geek-ite. Wonderful. Thanks. Kyle from Cruise, let us know what you vote for. Hey, listeners, thanks for listening again. Thank you for donating. If you didn't donate, shame. And, well, you can keep listening for free. That's hilarious. I sang that, and now Zoom asked me, are you playing music? No, that was not musical at all. So thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with more recalls, more Tao of Fred, more dumb things that Tesla did. How do I know? Do I know the future? No, I know Tesla. So thanks, listeners. Bye.
Thanks, you. Bye-bye.
For more information, visit www.autosafety.org.